Well, it's good to speak to you today. Got a lot on my notes here to talk about. I think I was mentioning before you got on that MIF starts Friday and all day Saturday, and then it transitions to PDAC
Yeah.
on Sunday. And BMO is going on right now. No, they don't invite me, but sometimes I stop by and I have a drink there. It seems that it's pretty quiet this year, and just heard sentiment isn't that great, which is not a surprise considering the way the market's trading. Just sort of, what's your gauge of sentiment here, and how the junior mining sector feels to you right now?
It's pretty bad. I, I don't think that's a secret or a surprise to anybody. Um, yeah, I mean, I think people are a little bit nervous about base metals because they're nervous about China. Precious metals, I don't know what everybody's problem is. I mean, I'm very impressed at how well gold's trading, really. When you look at all the potential macro headwinds, it's actually pretty impressive that it's hanging in over 2,000. It just keeps coming back every time it gets knocked down. I don't know what to think about, sector sentiment on the equity side, other than that there's just so many, there's so many other areas in the market, bigger areas in the market, where it's just been a broken slot machine lately, where, every day things just go up. It's hard for the resource base to sort of get traction and pull in new eyeballs and get attention with that kind of a backdrop. I mean, I hate the idea of thinking we'd need Wall Street to do worse for us to do better, but that might be where we are. And that's really why, aside from some, more developed companies that I've followed for a long time that I'm a fan of, I've largely been sticking to exploration plays, because when the market's like this and sentiment's like this and liquidity is like this, for me, discoveries are kind of the name of the game, because that's where you can really see outsized gains, even in a shitty market. Obviously, the gains would be better in a better market. And the simple truth is, it feels to me like we need two or three or four or five companies to make discoveries and just keep going and just get some momentum, add some real market cap, and get people to start paying attention again. I mean, quite often, back in the day before the great financial crisis, if you will, before probably half the people listening to this were born, quite often bull markets would start with one or two big discoveries. That's really what would drive money into the space. So, I mean, maybe that's what we need again. I mean, there's a couple of pretty good ones going on, and they're individually getting attention. You look at companies like Philo, um, that's just a beast. But so far, at least, it doesn't appear to be spreading out that much. But I think that's what we need. I mean, we need three or four guys to make good discoveries and show good gains, and remind people that this is a tough sector, but it's a sector where if you're in the right stock at the right time, the gains can be very, very large.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point about new discoveries, and that really is the only area of the resource sector that can diverge from the overall sentiment in the sector. You got to make a new discovery
Yeah.
to make yourself stand out, and set yourself apart, and no longer be a victim to the sell programs that go on every day, right?
Yeah. And unless anyone has any illusions too, I mean, understand that, the drill plays that I'm a sucker for, this is not the low risk end of the scale. These are high risk stocks. If you're playing this stuff, you got to think in terms of, owning, I would think, at least 5 or 10 of them. Most discovery exploration programs aren't going to work. That's just the nature of exploration. If it was that easy, gold wouldn't be $2,000 an ounce. So you got to understand. You got to understand. You're going to have to trade around things, and you can get companies that make, what look like good discoveries, pull a bunch of early good holes, and get a lot of traction. And at the end of the day, for one reason or another, it doesn't work out. So it's not This isn't stuff that you buy and file away and forget. I mean, you've got to trade it, but if you're willing to take a shot at some of these things, if you get a good one, the gains can be very large and make up for the 20 or 30% losses on a bunch of ones that don't work out.
Hmm. Yeah, I do want to talk about some drill plays in a little bit, but first, a little bit more about the broader sector, maybe about base metals. So the sort of the main face of the mining sector, Robert, Friedland, he seems to get the most attention of anybody in the industry. He's been harping on about this, the revenge of the miners concept for a couple of years now, and saying that we're getting to this stage where it's going to be the, revenge of the miners because the mining industry is going to have to help us do the green transition and generate all these battery metals, copper, nickel, graphite, lithium, what have you. Um, and obviously, his biggest investment is a company that's mining copper and nickel in Africa. So he's talking his book for sure, but it seems to make a lot of sense, but it's not really happening.
Yeah.
What is your take on how this might play out? Because I mean, clearly the green transition is not going to go exactly according to plan and all those
No.
forecast, graphics that we see out there. But still, there's going to be a supply shortfall here at some point, right?
Oh, yeah, no, I don't. I at a grand scale, I definitely agree with Robert on his thesis. I think part of the reason base metals have stalled out a bit is it is partially China, because China just looks like a shit show, and of course nobody really knows what the hell is going on over there. Their macro numbers are pretty much useless. You got to just go by anecdotal evidence, and things don't look great. And also the EV revolution has slowed down a little bit. I mean, I guess the market is finding out that people don't love the idea of buying $100,000 electric vehicles quite as much as maybe everybody assumed. Plus, there simply aren't enough people around who can buy $100,000 electric vehicles. But I think it's more of a hiccup. I do think the electrification is the way of the future. It's going to happen, and I definitely agree with Robert on the revenge of the miner scenario. It's not going to be every element or every metal. Copper, which is where his book is probably going to be the main beneficiary, I think, just because it's got the scale, and it's got the recognition that when copper goes to $5 or $6 or $7 a pound, which I think it'll do over the next 2 or 3 years, the market's going to notice. Even the broader market notices copper, because copper is just a thing. Everybody knows what it is. It's a little trickier for, say, nickel, uh, mainly because of Indonesia. I've always been a little bit concerned about the stuff that gets mined there out of these oxidized deposits, and it basically gets shipped as low grade concentrate. And I think there were guys in the nickel sector that said, well, that's not grade A copper. And it's like, well, yeah, it's not, but it will be grade A copper at the other end of a smelter. So I think maybe nickel guys were deluding themselves that Indonesia wasn't going to have the impact it clearly is right now. And they seem to be bound and determined to just really ramp production. So I think that's going to make things a little tougher for nickel. Zinc, I think, is generally in better shape. Most things are. The simple truth is, for all of the green revolution stuff and all the government regulations being put in, government, as any cynical miner expected, is not following through in most cases with regulations that ensure it's a little bit easier to make sure there won't be supply bottlenecks. I'm not seeing any evidence anywhere really that permitting is getting any easier or any quicker, and infrastructure costs certainly aren't getting lower. So the simple truth is, if you want another 5 million tons of copper in 5 years from now, you're going to be paying $6 or $7 or $8 a pound for it. That's just how it's going to be. It's really, really hard for the mining sector to grow production by anything like the rates you would need if you believe the green revolution numbers when it comes to how much more copper and lithium and etc. I'm a little less. I'm not really a lithium bug, simply because lithium's all over the freaking place. It's not really that rare. I suspect that's one area where the mining sector is actually going to ramp production faster than people think. Um, I'm getting to like uranium again. I just haven't found an explorer yet that really floats my boat. But at a general level, yeah, Robert's right. You're not going to get anything like the transition that Western governments are trying to accomplish unless you're willing to pay quite a bit more for most base metals. It just isn't going to happen. You're not getting that much metal unless you're willing to pay more money for it. That's how it is.
Yeah, I want to talk about some copper explorers, but just one last point on this topic. It seems to me, just seeing how policymakers um, don't have much foresight, to say the least, to put it kindly. And some of the mistakes that have been made in countries like Germany, getting rid of their nuclear power so they could burn dirty coal. It seems to me like we're going to, in the West, and I'm talking about
Yeah,
Canada, in the US more specifically, it seems like we're going to have to get to an accident stage where there's a big mess due to the lack of investment in the mining industry, in new infrastructure. Just there's just not there. There hasn't been the investment, and China has dominated every metal. Basically, that exists on planet Earth. They run the markets for everything, including copper.
yeah,
It seems like we're just going to have a mess on our hands before there's enough political will to do what's necessary. Do you feel the same way?
yeah. I mean, if you look, maybe the best example of changes in really gross large scale changes in investment, and because of that changes in production is probably the energy sector, right? I mean, everything was just fine and dandy in the oil sector, and we had these nice guys with cool robes and camels selling us oil for $2 a barrel, and everything was hunky dory. And then along comes this war in the Middle East, and the guys in the nice robes with the camels get a little bit pissed off and say, you know what, we don't really want to sell you oil for $2 a barrel anymore. We think we're going to sell it to you for $30 a barrel. And I'm not saying there's an equivalent situation because mining is much more distributed, but I could see a situation where you just get down to zero warehouse stocks in something like copper, for instance. Everybody outside the mining sector forgets that mining is one of those rare sectors where producers don't control the price of their product. But that's a two-way street. I mean, if you run out of inventories one day and everybody cottons onto that in the futures market, your 380 a pound copper is suddenly 680 a pound copper, and it happens really fucking quick. And we may see a situation like that, and at that point, all the politicians will be freaking out. Of course, they'll all be blaming the miners and telling us that we're getting windfall profits. There's no end to irony when it comes to the mining
Yeah,
sector, but
exactly.
but it may take that, right? I mean, there's always some, all these metals. There's always some above ground stuff floating around somewhere, but the day may well come, and probably will come, and it may be copper, where one day everybody wakes up and goes, shit, there's no warehouse stocks, and guys that already have delivery contracts and stuff freak out and just start hitting every offer they can find, and suddenly the price goes up a couple of bucks in a week. That may be the kind of situation we see, similar to what we saw in oil 50 years ago, where everything looked fine and suddenly everybody woke up and there were lineups at the gas station, and oil was $30 a barrel and nobody knew how it happened. Everybody in the oil and gas sector knew how it happened. They're all like, duh, like, we told you.
Right. Yeah. 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 That seems like to be where we're heading. And maybe February, March 2022 was just a little bit of a teaser for
Yeah,
what's to come. It seemed like a crisis for a few weeks, and then it kind of abated. But certainly, it could be foreshadowing, what's to come in the future. So, I'm obviously a gold guy. I mean,
yeah,
I really like gold, but gold mining is challenging in
yeah,
2024. So I've been focusing more on like porphyry plays and porphyry explorers, and I think we have a few companies in common that we
Yeah.
both kind of like here. Sendero is the first one on my list, and they put out some news this morning. I've read through it. I'm definitely not like an expert on the company by any stretch, but seemed like a pretty normal piece of news to me. I mean, there's no assays here. What is your take
Yeah.
on this news from Sendero this morning?
I think Sendero is a pretty good example of irony, really. I mean, I talked to Michael, the chairman, semi regularly, and I knew all along they really didn't like the idea at all of putting out a release ahead of assays. They weren't planning to do that. They changed their minds, about a week and a half ago, and then the reason, to put it simply, is that Michael's going to be presenting with me at MIF on Friday. They don't have any assays yet, and they were like, "Shit, I mean, we want to be able to talk about these holes. We can't do that unless we put out a descriptive release. I mean, you can't do selective disclosure at MIF." So they put this release out, and I talked to Michael briefly this morning after it came out. He was in shock. He was just kind of like, he was literally like, "What the fuck? Like, what do people think they're reading here?" I think what spooked people was, they didn't see, shiny core pictures, which I wasn't really expecting because I knew their QP, um, Dave Royal, really didn't like the idea of putting out core pictures ahead of assays, so I wasn't really expecting it personally. But I think, without those pictures, without those flashy pictures, and without, yeah, we're seeing gobs of copper falling off the core everywhere. People kind of freaked out. To me, the most important part of that release was one of the targets called Ollita. Uh, in that target, the first hole they drilled, it got to 450 meters. They hit a fault, got stuck. They've started another hole about 100 meters away, but that 450-meter hole showed them two things that are actually really important. One is that they transitioned from they got through the lithocap that they knew was there at surface. Everybody knew it was there. They got into high sulfidation epithermal, confirmed that's what it was. I mean, they already knew that there was epithermal gold mineralization near surface. There's probably several 100,000 ounces there at, I don't know, a gram or something. That's all the drilling in the past was really directed towards that. They got through that, and not too far below that, they got right into intense porphyry alteration. And they did, in fact, and it wasn't clear from the news release. I think it was a little confusing the way they worded the description, but I confirmed with Michael they did in fact get into porphyry towards the bottom of the hole. And what that combination tells you is that this is a telescope system, which, you know, people hear the word telescope and they think of the person pulling this telescope out. In this case, they actually mean pushing a telescope together, where the epithermal phase of the system and the porphyry phase are actually quite close together. They can be considered basically a single mineralized system. Quite often, you can get epithermal, and the porphyry that's probably driving it might be a couple of kilometers down. So who cares? In this case, they got into it in that hole. They're hoping to get into it more in this hole. This hole's angled, but it's angled towards a very, very strong chargeability high and a mag high that just got generated from surveys that just finished in the last couple of weeks. Um, this sort of combined high sulfidation epithermal porphyry system, that is, in fact, the model for the giant deposits that are forming up in the Vicuna, namely Filo and Jose Maria. Those are both telescope systems. So just the fact that they hit and confirmed a telescope system is actually really, really positive news. I don't know what the grades are going to be in this hole. I mean, I care, obviously, but for me, the fact they've confirmed it's telescoped, and they're going to get some gold numbers in the top of the hole. There's gold all around it, so there's no reason to think they won't get a gold intercept. They're going to get some copper. I don't know how much. I mean, Michael's description of it to me sounded more positive than the description in the news release. The news release was very conservatively written. I think that's Dave Royal. He really didn't like the idea of even writing this release. So I think maybe people definitely overreacted when they drove it down to 25 cents this morning. I was buying the stock as I was writing the update, if anybody cares. So I mean, it's not the boomer, oh my God, we got 20% chalcopyrite for 500 meters that I guess people were hoping for, but it was actually a pretty positive release. I liked it. I'm happy with the way things are going.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see the markets, response to this. It seems that just there were high expectations, or there are high expectations, maybe a little bit lower now,
Yeah,
but and then the market, oh, there's no assays, it must be bad, right? Which
yeah,
is just knee jerk. It's junior mining. If a company doesn't put out assays, then they must not be good assays. That's just the assumption constantly. But
yeah,
in this particular situation, there's a very clear explanation. And really, I mean, again, I'm not an expert on this one, but just looking at the ground magnetics and the IP, this whole four is targeting that really nice mag high and the chargeability anomaly. I mean, this seems
yeah,
like hole four is an important hole, right?
yeah. And it's, with porphyry systems, I mean, quite often your best chargeability is generated by pyrite rather than chalcopyrite, but they do tend to go together, and the chalco tends to be on the margins of these sort of porphyry clouds, so of these pyrite clouds. So I mean, it definitely looks like they're aiming the whole right way, and that's a really strong. I mean, they don't really point out in the release, but I mean that's a 55 millivolt chargeability high. That's a really high chargeability high. I mean, that's really strong. So I'm really waiting with bated breath for that. And yeah, in this case, they just don't have the assays back. They kind of thought they would, and that's the initial plan was that they would have a release out with a couple of holes that were missed, but they just don't have the assays. So
Okay.
uh, they should have them pretty
Um,
soon. I mean, the turnaround's not bad in Chile, so and Argentina, so it shouldn't be that much longer.
so, how well funded is this company, and what's the plan for this phase of drilling? I mean, there's a bunch more holes to come, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's depending on individual hole length, there'll probably be another 5 or 6 holes. I mean, theoretically, they might be able to expand the program a bit, though they're not promising it. I mean, they're at 4,000 meters, so they don't really want to get stuck once winter comes on.
Hmm.
They would, they probably got enough cash to expand things a little bit. Although I think they'd probably want to raise a bit if they were going to do anything substantial. Um, I think Michael's getting offers, but I mean, I don't think he wants to do it where it's trading today. He sounded pretty positive this morning, so I think he's hoping for good things. I've talked to him in the past about, can you add a second rig? And he's like, maybe. I mean, they think they can get a second rig. The real problem for them is camp. He said we'd have to expand the camp, which is not something you can do overnight in a place like that. He said a drill rig, and he said it's just personnel, right? He said we need to have another 3 or 4 geos. So they're not they're not promising to add a second rig. I think they'd push the season a bit if they like what they're seeing. So right now it's supposed to be 4,500 meters. They may go past that.
Hmm.
Um, just it's weather dependent as much as anything, really.
Okay. So yeah, so that's send. So moving on to VR resources, VRR on the venture. So this is a really interesting one. I learned a bit about it about a year ago, early 2023. They have a diamond project in northern Ontario that caught some attention for a while in 2023. But really a strong management team. The CEO has a good track record, including selling Hathor for $650 million about a decade ago to Rio Tinto. And they seem to really go for big scale targets, trying to really find something new where
Yeah,
nobody has drilled before. And so this new Boston, it's in the Walker Lane trend between Tonopah and Reno, an area of the world that I know reasonably well. And this is just like, I mean, it's a great project. It's just one of these projects that was mothballed in the early 80s. Doesn't seem like a whole lot of work has been done there since.
yeah,
Uh, Conoco put a model together in the late 70s that was focused more on the closer to surface moly portion of this project. But VR has taken new eyes to it and done an IP uh, an IP survey in 2023 that a deeper IP
Yeah.
survey that showed up this chargeability anomaly, and now they're looking to drill in the next, I guess, 5 to 6 weeks there. Tell us about VRR and why you like this target.
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked VR because I like Mike Gunning a lot. I've known Mike since Hathor days. Hathor was actually founded by a close friend of mine, Dale Walster. I mean, Dale intentionally doesn't get much credit for it because he stayed in the background, but he was the guy that put everything together. And I got to know Mike then, and I like him a lot. I mean, I often tell people that look, the Greenfield's exploration is it's the high risk part of the sector, no two ways about it. But if you're, if you want to lay down a bet here and there and you're looking for 10 baggers, Greenfields is where you find them. And the simple truth of the matter is there's very few management teams that have the cojones to go after truly new targets. And Mike's always been that guy, and he's very much a go big or go home guy. He's got no interest in small targets. He's got no interest in stuff that's been drilled 20 times over. And he got on to, and they've drilled 4 or 5 different projects in the last 4 years. Didn't get, massive joy from any of them. I mean, technically they've got a real discovery with the rare earth stuff in Northern Ontario, but that's not. I mean, I'm not really a rare earth guy. The diamond stuff is interesting, but I'm not a diamond bug, and neither, frankly, is Mike Gunning. Mike likes it at a technical level, but I think if he was going to go and drill the other 20 targets, which is what you need to do, De Beers or somebody would have to show up with $5 million and go, here you go, Mike, go do those holes. He might finance it at a better price, but I think his first love is really copper, and that's where we're at with New Boston. As you said, it was work by Conoco back in the day. They discovered it's a very, very large moly system. The moly's in sheeted veins. Grades kind of, meh. Uh, Moly prices are extremely volatile. It's one of those metals that is quite necessary as a steel hardener. It's only produced in a few places, and it tends to go through these cycles where it gets spiky. And prices right now are decent for molybdenum. I would say the moly at New Boston, almost makes sense. I don't think it's quite there. I think you need higher moly prices or a higher grade zone. But for Mike and Justin, it was more, for them, it was more what that moly might mean in terms of being part of a bigger system. And what they were able to do last year that Conoco couldn't do because the equipment back in the day just wasn't strong enough and just didn't see deep enough was, they did a direct current IP that's much deeper seeing than the stuff in the past, and much more powerful gear than was available, 50 years ago. And what that highlighted for them was a very large, very strong chargeability anomaly that's basically at depth. When you look at the sheeted veins that have the moly on the east side of the project, and you kind of look at the strike and the dip of that sheeted vein system, it's basically pointing right at this chargeability anomaly. So they think this anomaly is probably the buried porphyry that's the fluid driver for all of the near surface material. There's high grade skarn on the west side, but that's had a bunch of holes put in it, and Mike doesn't think it's got the scale potential. It's the porphyry is his real target, and there is, there's good evidence with the moly. There is copper in some holes. Nobody ever put a hole where this target is, which is kind of in the middle of the trend between the two known mineralized areas. And I mean, to me, it looks like it's a pretty good shot. Go big or go home target. I mean, I like the looks of it. Mike is, he'd like to be drilling in March. He's been trying to get a strategic in. Last time I talked to him, he said he was close on that, but it still hasn't shown up yet. I think if he doesn't get a strategic nailed down in the next week or two, like say by the end of PDAC, I suspect he would do a small placement. I think he would be loath to run the bank account down to fumes, and rightly so, in my opinion. I think he'd be wise to do it, $500,000 or $1,000,000. And he knows my hand is up for that already. I mean, I already
Mhm.
told him I do a place when I'm writing a check, so no problem there. I risk reward wise, is it a sure thing? No. Are they going to get dusters? I doubt it, because they're going to be drilling through the sheeted vein system, so they're gonna get numbers in these holes. But if they can hit good copper numbers, there's a lot of upside potential in this drill program.
So they probably need to raise a little bit of money in the
Yeah,
next month. I mean, that's the sensible thing to do.
yeah.
And then drill. You think 3 holes here?
What they've got laid out is 3 holes. I mean, I imagine if they, if they saw enough in the core that they were like, yeah, okay, we're in it. I mean, I don't know whether they try to rush assays or just really arm wave it, maybe raise some more money and do some more drilling. They've got enough pads approved that they can do I think they've got something like 12 pads approved already, and they can drill multiple holes off any of those pads. So if they're getting joy, I think the plan is to either expand the program or, probably just try to get some assays out there and get some price, raise some more money, and just go right back. I mean, Justin thinks he could put enough holes in this thing this year to get to a resource. I mean, that seems a little aggressive to me, but like, whatever.
Yeah, it's
Like,
pretty aggressive.
yeah,
I mean,
but
if you
okay.
look at if you look at slide 24 of the VR presentation, I mean, hole one, like they haven't mapped out. I mean, this is right down the throat of this anomaly,
Yeah,
like right to the source. I mean, so this is the sort of thing like after 3 holes, they're either going to have some joy or they're going to kill the project. I mean, that kind of seems like
yeah.
where
I
it's
would
at
think if
here.
they didn't, yeah, if they didn't get much in these 3 holes, I don't, they're not gonna bang their heads against the wall. That's not. I mean, one of the things I like about Mike is, one, he's go big or go home, but two, he's not a guy who falls in love with projects. I mean, he's there to make a discovery, and if he doesn't like the look of it after a few holes, he'll just move on. I mean,
Right.
that that's his MO.
Yeah, I like pretty much everything about this new Boston project. I mean, I liked it, when I first saw it, when they first put it out there, like, hey, we've got this project uh, in the Walker Lane near, Looning. It's a town that's nearby off of 95 of the highway. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you got all the pieces of the puzzle. It makes a lot of sense, but until they drill that deeper target and prove it, then it's all theoretical.
Yeah,
And obviously this drilling is not cheap. This is probably 400 to 500 a meter kind of part of the country to drill, and it's core, it's deeper. So there's a lot of torque here. I mean, this is a
yeah,
classic drill spec. There's a lot of torque here, but not for the faint of heart, because if they miss, it's not going to be pretty, right? Because then it's back to square one again. Um, but okay, and then Aston Bay, Eric. So this is
yeah.
one where American West put out a pretty thorough piece of news a couple of days ago, and they look to be pretty aggressive this year up at Storm.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I love these Aussies. I mean, these guys aren't kidding around. I had a conversation with Tom, I don't know, a month or two ago, and he was arm waving a program size, and I was kind of like, okay, it's like they're 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 going to do that much. That sounds like a lot, and they're going to have to raise a bunch of money. But they did I guess it's done. I think most of it was flow through, and it was lined up with a couple of flow through funds, so that's done. The Aussies did a $10 million raise. They had several million. I would think this program that they announced the other day, you got to be looking at close to 15 million. I mean, it's a very aggressive program, 22,000 meters of drilling, in that part of the world. I mean, these guys are not kidding around. I was really happy to see that. It looks like, half the budget, a little bit more than half of it is resource expansion. I mean, they put a resource out about a month ago. They want to expand that in the known zones, plus a couple of the other zones where they have a couple of holes and they know they can build some tonnage. But they're also directing almost, by the sounds of it, almost half the meterage is being directed at targets that haven't been drilled before and or deeper, quote unquote sediment hosted stuff. The sed hosted model. This is kind of the same as Cooper Schaefer in Poland or the Central African Belt copper deposits. Basically, the stuff Friedland's mining. Uh, that's the kind of stuff that gets a lot of punchers really excited and definitely gets the big companies paying attention because those are systems that have potential for both scale and grade. They proved last year that they had said hosted copper. I mean, it fits the model in all respects in terms of the mineralogy, the location, the formation, how it was, bound to hydrocarbons, basically all the parts were there. The grade and the thickness of the intercepts was, meh. I mean, for me, the main thing was that they'd proven the set hosted model, which is really what everyone who's been in Storm all along from day one, Kamenko, BHP, all of them. This is always what they were looking for, but nobody really tagged it until the Aussies did last year. I know they're doing a bunch of geophysics. I mean, one of the difficulties they have with this deeper stuff is they get these big, deeper targets, but how do you differentiate the best place to put a hole with that? I mean, I know they're doing more loop EM and they're doing more gravity, so they might be using that to try to target a little better. But I was happy to see they're willing to throw that much meterage at new targets. I mean, it's great for Bay. I mean, I'm normally a guy that likes to see companies drill their own stuff, but this is a case where Thomas did a very smart deal with the Aussies. They've earned 80%, but to get past that, for it to become a JV, they have to get to a bankable study. I suspect there'll be arguments down the road about what defines a bankable study. Certainly under Canadian law, it's basically a feasibility study. I mean, anything below that isn't really considered bankable under Canadian regulations, and they're a long way from that. I mean, if they have to literally get to a bankable study, you're looking at least 2 or 3 years. So all the spending's on their dime. So it's great for Aston Bay, $15 million program. Tom doesn't have to put up a dime. Um, Going to get results from 22,000 meters. I mean, it looks good to me. I mean, I was pretty happy with that announcement.
Yeah, it does. It's about the best news that I think a Bay shareholder could have hoped for, and they're going to drill some of these sort of satellite targets like Cyclone North, Thunder, Lightning Ridge. The Gap. These are areas that have seen limited drilling, and based upon the new work that they did in the last year, they have some new target areas, I guess, where there's
Yeah,
very low, density of drilling. In fact, there's an area of Lightning Ridge where I don't think there's any holes in that exact target area. At Gap, there's like two holes. So this stands to be a pretty exciting year, at Storm.
yeah. No, I think there's definitely room for new discoveries. I mean, I know that. I mean, the Aussies for good reason. I mean, they've been a bit focused on driving this sort of shallow, potentially direct shipping ore material. That which makes sense. I get it. It's an extremely expensive place to work. If they can figure out a way to start up some low capex production that makes money and use that to recycle money into the more expensive exploration, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know how fast they can make that happen, but I know they're focused on it. So I was pretty pleased to see they were willing to do exploration drilling. I mean, to me that was obvious because really, if you look at the chart last year, uh, you don't have to be Einstein to figure out what traders were focused on. I mean, they were putting out these shallow holes. The market was nice. Who cares? Nice. Who cares? And then they put out a release saying, "Oh yeah, we think we tagged this at hosted copper," and the stock went freaking crazy. So it's pretty obvious what everyone was focused on. I wasn't sure they really got that, but based on the way they laid this program out, they obviously do. They want to make sure people get excited about this year's work.
If anybody has a question for Eric, we got about another, I don't know, 15 minutes maybe. If you want to ask Eric a question, please ask to speak, and I'll activate your speaker mic. One company that you and I haven't really talked about, I'm sure you've seen me talk about it, is Hercules Silver, BIG on the venture, and I'm just interested in what your impression of that discovery was last year, and the Barrick investment and where it stands today, and sort of this idea of a new copper porphyry belt being found.
Yeah, I mean, I don't follow the newsletter. I mean, it kind of got away from me. Once everybody got really worked up about it late last year, I mean, it suddenly had a 300 million market cap. So I was kind of like, I'll just, I'll wait for some more holds. I do like the look of it. I'm like everybody. I'm quite curious to see what the deep IP looks like. I understand why they're not releasing it. I know they're trying to. I don't know if they tied up everything they want, but I know they were tying up more ground, and for good reason. Didn't really want to talk about it. The Barrick investment was impressive, although my personal opinion, and I'm not going to say I've asked Barrick about this, but my personal impression was they looked at the system scale and said, what the hell? Let's cut a big check. Um, if it works out, we'll be heroes. If it doesn't work out, 20 million bucks isn't the end of the world. Which is to say, I don't think Barrick knew much that the market didn't know, and I think part of what drove it to $1.70 was a lot of traders saying, "Well, Barrick obviously knows something we don't." I don't think we did. I'm not sure they saw that much that wasn't public when they wrote that check, because I know it all happened pretty fast. But yeah, it does look like these guys are onto a new discovery. I'm certainly not discounting the idea of starting to follow it. I'm trying to pick my spots, and I would like to see this geophysics. But again, it's got the hallmarks of a very large system, potentially a belt, really, that wasn't recognized before. And that's the name of the game when you're looking for this stuff. And obviously, they've got the market's attention. That's pretty obvious. I think you've mentioned it once or twice in the last in the last month
Yeah,
or two.
it's
I vaguely recall you tangentially referring to it.
it certainly got my attention. I don't know how much of the market's attention it has, but yeah, it definitely has my attention. That's for sure. Yeah, and the whole new copper porphyry belt is very exciting, and I think that does explain some of Barrick's investment, and Rio Tinto's extreme interest, including the fact that they've been staking in the area, and obviously they have a operating mine in a neighboring state, a copper porphyry that I think has been around for a while, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and the fact that it had that run from 20 cents to $1.60 during an overall pretty morose period for the junior mining sector shows you that if you have a new discovery that captures the imagination and the attention of major mining companies, then you can have that kind of 700% move, even from a 30 or $40 million market cap. You can still have a 7 or 8x run. It's still limited to just them at this point. There's no sort of area play in play here at this point. Although there is a private company that has some of the neighboring land called Scout, which actually I think we might hear more about Scout, later this year. They have the Cuddy Mountain claims, which is on the Forest Service land, sort of, adjacent to Hercules. But yeah, there's not really an area play here in
No.
motion yet, and we'll just have to see if one does get into motion. I think people are still figuring out exactly. Um, I guess the bright rocks that you want to be in, right? And maybe Hercules has some of the secrets that they don't want to give away just yet, but eventually it's going to be public knowledge, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit surprising that, if nothing else, we haven't seen a few, haven't seen a few rounders pick up 20 claims and start arm waving it, but I imagine that's coming. I mean, if they have success with this year's drilling and get back up to that three or $400 million market cap, it's hard to believe there won't be a few guys. I mean, I think they've, between them and Rio, there's been a significant amount of staking. I don't know how much open ground there is. Like you mentioned, Scout has some property there. I don't know how restricted, if it's restricted at all, the staking is. I mean, dealing with the U.S. Forest Service is never fun, but that's that's just how it is in a lot of the U.S. Maybe that's held people back, but I would think if this really becomes like a massive thing, you're going to see guys staking 50 kilometers away and arm waving it. I mean, I'm a little surprised it hasn't happened yet, honestly.
Yeah. Well, maybe we're going to hear more about it soon. Before I let you go, Eric, is there any, are there any other, drill plays that have your attention? Something
One,
that,
one,
yeah.
yeah, well, one other company that will be presenting with me at MIF, and this is a company I know really well. I've owned it pretty much literally from day one. The CEO's a good friend of mine, and he's my very close friend, Nicola, that runs Peak uh, Investor Services. Or he's actually your husband, Greg. Greg and Dave Dowd, who's the chief geo for this company called Sun Peak, PEAK is the symbol. They were part of the group, most of the group really. Dave, one of the other geos, is also part of this group. They were the original discovery group behind the Bisha VMS discovery in Eritrea, that sort of made Nevsun and was taken over 3 or 4 years ago. They moved on from that to a company of their own called Sunridge, also in Eritrea. They made another discovery called Asmara, lower grade than Bisha, but very large scale. Eritrea just became an impossible place to deal with, so they ultimately sold that to a Chinese company. They've moved on to Ethiopia, basically the other side of the border, same rocks, Nubian shields, same target type. And of course, as soon as they went public and started drilling, a war started. So that kind of put the kibosh on things for a couple of years, but things have settled down now. Greg's a conservative guy, and he would never do anything to put any of his people in danger. So he was, waiting and waiting and waiting until things settled down. But they've gone back in there now. I think they've been a bit coy and said they're going to be drilling this year. I think this year is actually going to mean more like next month. I don't think it's going to be that long. I'm actually expecting to see a release from them this week, not on drilling so much, but more details on the targets they're going to be drilling. This is a stock where I know these guys really well. I know their track record. I know they're dealing with the same targets. I spent a fair amount of time looking at these targets when I first bought the stock and started following it before they went public. I've got very high. I have, for any company this early stage, this is probably the one where I've got the highest conviction these guys will find an ore body. I think they're going to find another one. These are really, really strong targets. And yes, it's in Ethiopia, so you're going to have to get past the the geopolitical risk. If you can't deal with that, fair enough. But I think if you're looking for a copper explorer that's got potential to hit great high grade copper gold holes, I think Sun Peak's going to pull some of those holes this year. I'm very, very confident.
That's a very interesting one. Yeah, I've known about Sun Peak for a few years now, and I know that the civil war there definitely halted the operations for a few years, and it's good to hear that things have calmed down now, and there is a possibility that they're going to get back to drill that project very soon. That's definitely a positive. It's one of those things, and I think there's a few of these in the junior mining sector right now. It's like the rocks aren't really the challenge. It's the people that are the challenge. So
Yeah,
hopefully the people are more peaceful and the rocks are still there. So,
yeah. I mean, I mean, you're going to be at MIF, obviously. You're presenting. I mean, you get a chance, you should go. I mean, I know Greg's going to be there. I don't know if Dave. I mean, I'm sure Dave will be going up for PDAC. I don't know if he'll be there for MIF, but it's worth meeting those two guys. I mean, Dave Dowd's, he's from the area. He's what the hell is he? Um, I'm thinking Lebanese, but he's not Lebanese. He's not from Lebanon, but he's from one of those countries. He gets along really well with the locals. He's really enthusiastic geo, but he's one of those guys where he's such a kind of laid back guy that people don't appreciate just how good a geo he is. This guy's a great geo, and he's jumping up and down about being able to drill these targets. Like he's really jacked.
All right. Yeah. So you have Peak, Sendero, and Headwater on your panel.
Yeah,
So that's 1 p.m. on Friday. And then I'm kicking it off at 9:20 a.m. And it's a secret what I'm talking about. You just have to tune in or attend at the Delta Hotel there in Toronto Friday morning to find out what my presentation is about. But MIF this Friday and Saturday, followed by PDAC beginning on Sunday. Thanks a lot, Eric. This was a great conversation. We hit on a lot of key companies and key areas, and I look forward to MIF. Thank you.
yeah. Thanks, Robert, and for everybody else. If all else fails, you can always come to the open bar at the end of the day and drown your sorrows.
Yes, that's always a good option. The open bar. All right. Thanks a lot,
Okay.
Eric. Cheers.
Thanks, Robert.